All right, today we're jumping into a topic that is both fascinating and, let's be honest, often misunderstood. We're talking about modern Native American tribal governments, how they're built, the real power they have, and the incredibly complex world they navigate every single day.
So, let's start with a headline that probably caught your eye. In 2024, a major conflict erupted between 9 Native nations in South Dakota and the state's governor, Kristi Noem. Things got so tense that they took a pretty drastic step. They banned her from entering their lands. And that made a lot of people ask a pretty simple question. Wait, can they actually do that? The short answer, yes, 100%. That move wasn't just symbolic, it was a real-world demonstration of tribal governments flexing their authority as distinct self-governing nations. So the real question isn't if they can do it, but how? What's the legal and historical foundation for that kind of power? To really get why a governor can be banned from tribal lands, we have to understand the single most important concept in all of this. It's the bedrock, the foundation for everything we're about to talk about, sovereignty.
So what do we mean by sovereignty? Well, in this context, it's the inherent right of Native nations to govern themselves. And that word inherent is everything. This isn't a right that was given to them by the U.S. government, it's a right they have always possessed. That one point changes the entire dynamic of their relationship with the United States.
And because of that, you have this really unique political status. Tribal governments are often called nations within a nation. Now, they are subject to federal law, but they also get to make and enforce their own laws on their own land. You can imagine this creates a constant push and pull, a tension that often leads to major conflicts with state and federal governments over everything from land use to gaming rights.
But, the way these governments look today didn't just happen overnight. There was a huge turning point back in the 1930s. A piece of legislation came along that was meant to undo past damage, but it ended up creating this massive clash between two totally different ways of thinking about government.
So by 1934, federal policies had been, frankly, a disaster. Tribes had lost something like 90 million acres of their land in about 50 years. So Congress passed what was called the Indian Reorganization Act, or the IRA. The stated goal was great, support Native sovereignty. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. The U.S. government basically decided that traditional Native ways of governing weren't fit for modern life, and so it pushed them, pretty hard, to adopt American-style constitutions.
And this right here shows the heart of that conflict. On one side, you have traditional consensus-based rule. The idea was to have community discussions to make sure every single voice was heard and to work towards a compromise that everybody could get behind. It values unity. On the other side, you have the U.S. model, majority rule. The option with 51% of the vote wins, period. Minority concerns can get left behind. It's all about efficiency and getting a quick, decisive outcome.
So how do the tribes react to this push? Well, the community was split. You can see that 181 Native nations went ahead and reorganized under the IRA, adopting these new government models. But look at this, a really significant number. 77 nations voted no. They rejected the plan, determined to hold on to their traditional ways of governing.
And that historical divide leads us directly to how tribal governments are mostly set up today. If you simplify it a bit, they tend to fall into one of two buckets, what you might call a modern structure and a hybrid structure.
Okay, so the modern structure, which you see in a lot of those 181 IRA reorganized nations, is going to look pretty familiar. It's often got the classic 3 branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. But then you have the hybrid structure, which is just a fascinating example of adaptation. Take the Picouris Pueblo. They were one of the nations that rejected the IRA. So today, they have the 3 branches, but they also have a general council made up of all adult members, and to pass a law, they need a 2/3 majority. They found a way to keep that core value of consensus.
Okay, so we've got the history and the structures down. Now for the really interesting part. How does this all play out in the real world? What does exercising sovereignty actually look like day in and day out?
Well, they do a lot. Tribal governments are the engine of their communities. They get to decide who is a tribal citizen. They manage their own lands and natural resources. They run the schools, the utilities, the roads. They operate their own police forces and their own court systems. They can even issue business licenses and collect taxes. Essentially, they do everything a local or state government does, just with that extra layer of sovereign status. But, and this is a big but, it is not always easy. We're supposedly in an era of self-determination, where the U.S. government is meant to support tribal sovereignty. But in practice, that often means tribes have to navigate this insane maze of federal bureaucracy.
For example, trying to get funding for something as basic as high-speed internet might mean dealing with 7 different federal agencies, all with their own rules and red tape. It can be incredibly frustrating.
And the Dakota Access Pipeline is a really powerful and painful example of a tribe's sovereignty being challenged. Back in 2016, the pipeline was approved to run right near the Standing Rock Sioux's main water supply, and it was done without proper consultation with the tribe. The tribe sued to stop it, but construction went on, and ultimately, they lost in court. The pipeline was built, but that fight is not over. They are still working to have it removed, which just goes to show you that asserting sovereignty can be a very long and difficult battle. But then again, there are some major victories. Take what happened in Oklahoma in 2019. The governor there tried to interfere with the tribe's gaming compacts. So what did the tribes do? Several of them sued, arguing that the governor's actions violated federal law. And you know what? The federal courts sided with the tribes. This is a huge deal. It proves a critical point. When there's a clear federal law protecting tribal rights, it trumps state law. As the old saying goes, paper beats rock.
And that really brings us to what might be the best way to think about this whole topic. Sovereignty isn't some old document sitting in a drawer. It's active, it's alive, it's like a muscle. And the more you exercise it, whether that's banning a governor, suing a state, or managing your own resources, the stronger it gets.
From the standoff in South Dakota to the legal victories in Oklahoma, it's clear that tribal governments are a growing force. They're modernizing and adapting, all while holding tight to their identity as sovereign nations. So that leaves us with one final question to think about. As these nations keep exercising that muscle of sovereignty, what does the future of their very complicated relationship with the United States even look like?